I walked through my front door on a Thursday afternoon in late October, and the first thing I noticed was a pair of women's shoes I'd never seen before sitting neatly beside the entrance mat. They weren't my daughter's. I knew every pair she owned. These were wider, older, with a thick rubber sole, the kind of shoes a woman in her 70s might wear. I stood there in the hallway for a moment, my cane in one hand and my overnight bag in the other, and I told myself there was probably a reasonable explanation. There wasn't. I'd been in Hamilton General for 5 days following a total knee replacement. My right knee had been giving me grief for 3 years. Bone on bone, my surgeon called it, the kind of pain that woke you up at 2 in the morning and didn't apologize. I'd finally agreed to the surgery in September, scheduled for the second week of October. My daughter and her husband had known for months. I'd told them in August, over dinner at the kitchen table, and my daughter had said she'd take time off work to help me settle in when I came home. She didn't take time off work. I found that out from her voicemail, left the morning of my surgery while I was already in pre-op. "Dad, something came up at the clinic. I'll be there when you get home, promise." I was 63 years old, going under general anesthesia, and my child left me a voicemail. "I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. My name is not important. What matters is that I spent 31 years as a civil engineer for the city of Mississauga, raised my daughter alone after her mother passed from ovarian cancer in 2009, paid off a 4-bedroom house on Lakeshore Road West, and retired at 61 with a modest pension and enough savings to live comfortably and leave something behind. I'm not wealthy by Toronto standards, but I built what I have the old way, slowly, carefully, without shortcuts. My daughter, I'll call her by what she's always been to me, which is my girl, my only one, married her husband 4 years ago. He was 38 then, she was 32. He worked at a logistics company out of Brampton, managed a warehouse operation, made decent money, or so I understood. When they got married, they were renting a condo near Square One. 6 months after the wedding, the lease ended, and they asked if they could stay with me just for a few months while they saved for a down payment. The market was brutal, I understood. I said yes. That was 4 years ago. In 4 years, they had not paid me $1 in rent. Not for groceries, not for utilities. When I raised it gently 18 months in, my son-in-law said they were in a tough spot. His company had restructured, his position had changed, things were tight. My daughter looked at the table when he said this. I noticed that. I didn't push. I want to be fair. In the beginning, they helped around the house. My son-in-law mowed the lawn that first summer. My daughter cooked a few times a week. It felt, for a little while, like family living. I told myself it was good to have people in the house. After 14 years alone, maybe it was. But slowly, things shifted. The lawn stopped getting mowed unless I mentioned it twice. My daughter started coming home later, eating at odd hours, disappearing into their room for the evening. My son-in-law had friends over on weeknights. Men I didn't know sitting in my living room, watching my television. Nobody asked. Nobody thought to ask. I stayed quiet. I'd raised my daughter to have a good heart, and I believed she did, underneath everything. I kept waiting for them to say, "We've saved enough, we've found a place. Thank you, Dad." That conversation never came. Then my knee got bad enough that I couldn't ignore it, and I scheduled the surgery. And I went in on a Tuesday morning in October, thinking that when I came home Thursday afternoon, I would rest in my study, a room I had built for myself at the back of the house, with my books and my drafting table and a leather chair I'd bought in 1997 that had never once failed me, and everything would be fine. Instead, I found a pair of women's shoes I didn't recognize. I walked down the hallway toward my study. The door was closed. That was the first thing. I never closed that door. There was no reason to close it. I pushed on the handle. It didn't open. I pushed again. Locked. There was a key lock on my study door that I had never installed. I stood there for a moment. My knee was throbbing. I'd been in a car for 40 minutes, getting home from the hospital, and the physiotherapist had told me to keep it elevated. I stood there in the hallway of my own house, leaning on my cane, staring at a lock that had not existed 5 days ago. My son-in-law came out of the kitchen. He looked at me, and then he looked at the door, and then he did something I will remember for the rest of my life. He shrugged. "Hey," he said, "you're back." "What is this?" I asked. "Yeah, so my mother needed somewhere to stay for a bit. We put her in the study. It was the only room that made sense." I looked at him. "That's my room. It's just temporary. Your stuff is in the basement. He said it the way you'd tell someone their mail had been forwarded. Matter of fact. Not an apology. Not even the shape of an apology. I had never met my son-in-law's mother. Not once in 4 years of marriage. Not at the wedding. Not at any Christmas or Thanksgiving. She lived in Sudbury, I'd been told, and kept to herself. I had accepted this without question because it wasn't my business. But I had also never been introduced to her, never spoken to her on the phone, never received so much as a card, and now she was living in my study. Where is she? I asked. Resting. She had a long drive. Where is my daughter? At work. She'll be back by 6. I looked at the locked door. I thought about my leather chair. I thought about the box of my late wife's letters that I kept in the bottom drawer of the desk in that room. I had not looked at those letters in years, but knowing they were there, in my space, in my room, had always been enough. You put a lock on my door, I said. For privacy, he said. She's an older woman. She needs her privacy. This is my house. He looked at me with an expression I can only describe as patient, the way you look at someone who is being slow to understand something obvious. We'll figure it out, he said, and walked back into the kitchen. I sat down on the bench in the hallway. I needed to sit. My knee needed me to sit. I sat there for 10 minutes, listening to the sound of someone moving around inside my study, slow footsteps, a drawer closing, and I made a decision. I called my daughter. She didn't pick up. I left a message that was very calm and very short. I said, "Call me when you can. We need to talk before you come home." Then I called a locksmith. His name was a name I won't forget because he was the first person that day who treated me like a human being. He came within the hour. He was a younger man, maybe 40, with a blue work truck that parked neatly in the driveway. I met him at the door and explained the situation. A lock had been installed on an interior room without my knowledge or consent in my own home, and I needed it removed and the door made accessible. He looked at me and said, simply, "That's your house?" "It is," I said. "Then let's get it sorted." It took him 20 minutes. When the door swung open, I saw what they'd done. My drafting table had been pushed against the far wall and covered with a floral tablecloth. My books had been moved, not carefully, just moved, stacked sideways on the floor in the corner. My leather chair was still there, but there was a woman's cardigan draped over it, and a small electric kettle on the side table where I used to keep my reading glasses. The bottom drawer of my desk was slightly open. I crossed the room and checked it immediately. The letters were still there. I don't know why I'd been afraid they wouldn't be, but the relief I felt when I saw them was physical. The woman, my son-in-law's mother, was not in the room. I assumed she was in the bathroom down the hall. I asked the locksmith to remove the exterior lock hardware entirely and to replace the door handle with a standard interior knob. No lock at all. I thanked him and paid him in cash, $140, which felt like the best money I'd spent in years. I was sitting in my leather chair, cardigan moved to the hallway floor, when my daughter came home at 6:15. I heard her come in. I heard my son-in-law say something to her in the kitchen, their voices low. Then I heard her walk down the hall, and she stopped in the doorway of my study and looked at me sitting in my chair, and her face did something complicated. "Dad," she said. "Close the door," I said. She did. "Whose shoes are in the hallway?" I asked, though I already knew. She told me about his mother, about how the situation in Sudbury had become difficult. A landlord, a lease, some kind of dispute she was vague about how they hadn't wanted to worry me before the surgery, about how it was only going to be a few weeks. "You put a lock on my study door," I said. "She needed privacy, Dad. In my house. We thought you'd understand. You moved my things to the basement," I said. "I just had knee surgery. You moved my things to the basement of my own house and locked the door while I was in hospital." She was quiet. "Did you think I wouldn't notice?" I asked. "Did you think I'd come home and just accept it?" "We were going to explain. You left me a voicemail the morning of my surgery," I said. "You were going to explain." I watched her face. I had known this face for 32 years. I had watched it learn to read and ride a bicycle and grieve and love. I watched it now searching for the angle, the way to frame this so that I was the one being unreasonable. And something in me went very quiet and very clear. "I want her gone by the weekend," I said. My daughter straightened. "Dad, she has nowhere. That is not my problem. I am being the owner of this house," I said, "which I have let you and your husband live in without rent, without any contribution to the mortgage or the utilities or the groceries, for 4 years. I have not said a word about that. I'm saying something now. She left the room without answering me. What followed was 3 days that I would rather not relive in detail, but that I think you need to understand. My son-in-law spoke to me once, on the Friday evening, and told me I was creating a crisis, and that his mother had health issues, and that I was not being reasonable about the timing. I asked him, directly, where the money had gone. His salary at the logistics company had been, as I understood it, in the low 6 figures. My daughter's income as a dental office coordinator was modest but steady. In 4 years of living in my house, paying nothing, they should have had a substantial down payment saved. He looked at me and said things had been expensive. I asked him to be specific. He said there were debts from before the marriage. I asked how much. He left the room. I spent that weekend on the phone with my lawyer, a woman in Oakville I'd used for my will years ago, and I asked her to draw up a formal notice of a requirement to vacate, 30 days, as required under Ontario law for a situation like this, given they had no formal lease. She did not seem surprised by the request. She said she'd have it ready Monday. I also called my financial advisor at TD and had a conversation I should have had 2 years earlier. I reviewed my accounts, my RRSP, my beneficiary designations. I did not make any changes that weekend. I wanted to think clearly first. On Saturday morning, I went downstairs to retrieve some of my books from the basement. I found them in a plastic bin near the furnace. My drafting tools, instruments I'd used for 30 years, were in a cardboard box, not wrapped, just placed. My late wife's framed photograph, which had sat on my desk since 2010, was face down in the bin. I stood there for a long time. When I came back upstairs, my son-in-law's mother was in the kitchen making tea. She was a small woman, white-haired, wearing a housecoat. She looked up when I walked in, and I could tell from her expression that she hadn't been told much, or had been told the wrong things. She said good morning in a voice that was genuinely uncertain. I told her good morning. I told her that I understood she'd been placed in a difficult situation that was not of her making. I told her she had until Sunday to make other arrangements, and that I was sorry it had come to this, and that I meant no disrespect to her personally. She nodded slowly. She said, I told him this wasn't right. I didn't ask her to elaborate. I didn't need to. The formal notice went to my son-in-law's hands on Monday. He read it in the hallway, and when he looked up, his expression had changed. The patience was gone. He said I was going to regret this. He said my daughter would never forgive me. He said I was a bitter old man who couldn't stand to see his child have a life. I told him he had 30 days and that I hoped he'd use them wisely. My daughter and I did not speak for most of those 30 days. She went to work. She came home. She ate in their room. I ate at my kitchen table, alone, the way I had eaten for 14 years before they moved in, and I found it not happy, exactly, but honest. I could hear myself think again. They left on a Friday in late November, the week before the first real snowfall of the season. A moving truck, the mid-size kind, not a full truck. I noticed that, the size of it, how little they actually had. It took less than 3 hours. My son-in-law carried boxes without looking at me. His mother was already gone. She'd left 2 weeks earlier, back to Sudbury, and I'd heard through my daughter that she was staying with a cousin. My daughter was last. She came and stood in the doorway of the study. My study, back to what it was, books back on shelves, drafting table clear, chair where it belonged, and she looked at me. I thought she might say something cutting. I thought she might leave without speaking at all. She said, I'm sorry, Dad. I think I've been letting him decide things I should have decided myself. It was a small sentence for 4 years of silence, but it was something. I told her she was always my daughter. I told her she knew where I lived. I told her that some things would need to change before we could go back to what we were, and that I was willing to do the work if she was, but that it would take time. She nodded. She hugged me, the first time in months, and then she walked out to the truck. I updated my will in December. I did not remove her from it, but I made some adjustments regarding my estate that reflected, more honestly, where things stood. I told my lawyer to send my daughter a letter informing her of the changes. I didn't hide it. She called me when she received it, and we talked for 40 minutes, the longest conversation we'd had in over a year. It wasn't easy. It wasn't resolved. But it was real, which was more than I could say for most of what the previous 4 years had been. I put my wife's photograph back on the desk in January, cleaned the glass, straightened the frame, set it in the same spot it had always occupied, in the corner where the afternoon light comes in and goes gold around 3 o'clock. It was a Tuesday. I made myself a cup of tea, red rose, the way I always have, and I sat in my chair with the afternoon light doing what it does, and I thought about what I'd let happen and how long I'd let it go on, and I didn't feel angry anymore. Anger burns itself out. What I felt was something quieter, harder to name, like the house had been holding its breath for 4 years and had finally, on a Tuesday in January, breathed out. I'm still here. The knee is better, not perfect, the surgeon said, give it a full year, and I'm not there yet, but better. I walk the waterfront path on mornings when the weather allows, and I come home and make coffee and sit in my study and read, and no one has put a lock on my door since. I don't know if that's peace, but it's close enough for now.